When I spoke to you earlier about stopping in the middle of a line, if you have to do it and you've got to pick up on a line, you have to go back. When you start the line, you have to go back just a little bit from where you stopped, so you won't end up with a dot in the line. If you look, I stopped right here, so I can show you how to pick up on a line without being detected within your design. You have to start back. You actually have to start back on the line a little bit from where you left off, so you can work the line in here and then continue on and make your line. Also, while you're working, very important, make sure that you're working off the points of the needles. You don't want to take this machine and this tube and go onto the skin, because I can tell you, you'll dig a big hole in people and they'll be very unhappy. You have to work off the points of the needles themselves, which the points I'm referring to, visualize as a pencil, like this. You're only working off of that much of the needle. You're not using the whole part of the lead itself. Very important. If you'll notice, the sound of the machine is very consistent. It doesn't fluctuate like this. If you're tattooing and you're doing this, you're burying that needle into whoever you're tattooing, and they're going to be unhappy. If you'll notice the angle that I have the tattoo machine itself, it's for the correct penetration into the skin tissue. If I was to take the machine and be working on you and took the machine and I did this with the machine, I dropped it way low to the skin tissue, you're going to get what they call shootouts in the skin, which in part would look like the line went like this, and you'd have this big gray mark underneath the skin, and the ink would spread. Your lines would not stay nice and even like this here. So very important, angle of the machine, not like this. People commonly have that problem with the ink that shoots under the skin, like what I told you back here underneath, from using a round tip liner, because a round tip liner versus a square tip liner, the square tip liner is in a V shape, keeps the needle down in the bottom of the tip. When you have a round object like this, when you go around a corner, it can actually pull the needle out of the alignment of the tube. This is one where I'm going to go with the machine a little backwards here, but I'm going to go very slow so I make sure I get the proper penetration. Then I'm going to turn and come back in the correct position. If you'll notice, I work from here to here to here, and then I went up on this one side. Because I'm left-handed, I work from the left side better than the right side. So vice versa for a righty. Then I'm coming down and around the design, and now I'm going to pick it up this way. For a lefty, it's great. For a righty, he would have started here and worked from this side and then worked over. You're only as good as the last tattoo you put on. Believe me. That's the one they'll be talking about. Now I'm going to run this line here. Now I've got to get myself in a little bit different position because I'm not going to take it and go like this with it. That's too long of a line to try to pull backwards. I'm actually going to get in position and I'm going to run the line straight up so it keeps the needle in the bottom of the tube. Very important. Now we're going to wash our design down so we can see everything that's there. This is the time to go back, touch anything that you have to touch up before you do your fill-in work. You may have lines on here that may not exactly connect, which we're going to do a thorough job on checking first. We're wiping down with the tincture green soap, as you see. We're also going to get an alcohol wipe, and we're going to clean it down with an alcohol wipe too. And then we'll give it another shot of the tincture green soap just to cool it down, because unfortunately the alcohol makes it a little hot. Okay, we're going to get ready to do the fill-in work on this. Again, I'm working directly off the points of the needle. I'm not sticking that whole needle into the skin. Now we're starting to do what they call shading. I'm going in, I'm setting the ink in, and then I'm feathering the ink out. So I get more of what they call like an airbrush effect. With a 4-needle shader, again, it will allow you to get into the tight areas and still get that airbrush effect on the tattoo. Very important to not overwork the skin area. If you'll notice, I try to go back in, work the area twice, leave it. If you go in there too many times, you will actually chew the skin tissue up. Now if you'll look at my machine just before I'm going to touch it, if you'll come in close, you can see, you see the blot of ink that's on the outer side here? There's like a drop that is accumulated on the outside. You want to make sure. That's why you'll see me do this sometimes, because if you go on the skin with that, sometimes you'll pick up a good-sized puddle. And as you see, it's nice and square now. You're not going to get that. You're not going to get that big puddling. Something to watch for. If you'll notice, I'm going into this corner at a little bit of an angle, like this. I'm not taking the machine and doing this with it. Because if you go in this motion, you'll actually cut the skin wide open. If you'll notice, what I'm doing is I'm doing this. A little bit of a circular motion, but enough where I'm not coming up in there and going straight up with it. Okay, now I'm going to stop for a second. I'm going to point something out to you here about working ink onto the skin. If during your process you're in a very tight area like this, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll spray the tissue. If you spray the tissue and you leave the liquid on the surface, you can actually go back through and check what is actually into the skin and what isn't, and we'll show you different spots that you need to put a little touch of ink into. Notice I'm picking up when I'm shading. In, pick it up. When shading, try to get in as close as you can to the line before you shade out, without actually going into the line. That will make your black much more even. If you'll notice, when I'm shading the black, I'm actually taking the machine and doing this with it, in this motion, because remember, this is a rounder object and you have to give it some depth coming around. You can't run straight out with it because it'll be very flat. If you'll notice the angle of my hand, if you look at my fingers are not like they were when I outlined, because when I outlined I was like this. This, I have to be up so I can see where the ink is flowing. I'm up above the design. Alright, we're going to do some shading. We're going to shade from the bottom here. And we're going to do it again in a circular form. Get more of a rounding effect on the design. I've switched to way I've placed my hand on the skin because being back here is too difficult at this time. So now I'm going to move to this type here, which you can spread your fingers and still get the tissue plenty tight enough to get the correct penetration. Okay, now we're going to get in a little bit heavier black, still in the shading effect, but a little bit heavier up into these areas here, which will be primarily filled in a little bit more solid and then airbrushed out. And we're doing more of the solid type work in here for the harder black. If you'll notice, I'm working in small circular motions such as this here to be more thorough. If I was to take the tattoo machine and do this, it would not be very thorough and there'd be holes all through the black. Notice that my fingers are in a different position again. They're not down here like I did when I lined. When you're lining, you have to be down. When you shade, sometimes you have to be up above so you can see what you're doing. We're going to go into the eye area up here, a little bit of that heavier black, and then we'll be getting into what they call a little bit of washout, which is like a watered down black. It's regular straight black. It's diluted with distilled water to the darkness or the lightness that you prefer. I like personally to mix up bottles with different shades. Makes the job much easier. Just make sure that you shake them before you use them. If you'll look, the black is much different. This is a very light black. It will be light when it heals too, but it's a totally different effect than the heavy black. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually change the black just a little bit. I'm going to work a little lighter black than when I'm working here, and then I'll work up, and you'll see the black actually get lighter as I get to the top to give more of a rounding effect. I'm going to put a little bit of just distilled water in one of these cups here that I haven't used because I'd like to get just a little bit lighter effect. So, and sometimes from dipping into the black consistency gets a little bit too dark. So I'd like to have plain distilled water to wash out in too. Will allow me to get lighter as I'm going up on the top of the head. If you'll notice the different tones of black as I went up. A little darker, a little lighter, a little lighter, a little lighter. Okay, our tattoo has been checked over and now we're about ready to wrap this up.